Chairman Franks, Ranking Members Cohen, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for allowing me to testify today. I serve as the National Director of the CURE, but really we represent over 1,000 voices across the country. Our work is to fight poverty and be voices of the underserved by helping them apply principles of faith, freedom, and personal responsibility. I also serve on 2 boards that support pregnancy centers as well. I come today to offer my strong support and endorsement for H.R. 4924, the Prenatal Nondiscrimination Act. Like many liberals in the black community, I too believe that black lives do matter. But I think that the passage of H.R. 4924 would codify this notion into law by not forcing and allowing for race-selective abortions. As tragic as all the violent deaths are within the black community in cities like Chicago, Baltimore, D.C., they pale in comparison to the murders that are taking place within the wombs of black women every day throughout our nation. The rise of feticide in the world is astronomical. On the global front, we are virtually watching and observing entire countries alter birth rates and normal balance of population and gender due to sex-selective abortions. My support for this legislation is not only based on my deep personal thankfulness for being born to a black woman, or my conviction as an African-American male that deplores discrimination, or as a citizen of the country that does not want to see sex discrimination, but a citizen who deeply desires the same protections be afforded to them by the Constitution be given to all, including the preborn. My support also comes as a father and a man who sees the destruction of lives and have heard from and counseled the women who have had to deal with the emotional and physical consequences of having lived with the gut-wrenching termination of a pregnancy. Creating a life is an ultimate gift from God. What we do with that life is our gift back to God. The passage of H.R. 4924 would help ensure that we don't run short of the gifts that we give back to God. As stated years ago by the then pro-life Reverend Jesse Jackson in January of 1977, politicians argue for abortion largely because they do not want to spend the necessary money to feed, clothe, or educate more people. Here, arguments for inconvenience and economic savings take precedence over arguments for human value and human life. Psychiatrists, social workers, and doctors often argue for abortion on the basis that the child will grow up mentally and emotionally scarred. But who of us is complete, he asks. If incompleteness were the criterion for taking on life, would we all be dead? If we can justify abortion on the basis of emotional incompleteness, then your logic could also lead you to killing others for other forms of incompleteness as well, such as blindness, crippledness, or old age. And I would add to that race and or gender. Abortion based on sex selection, race selection, or gender selection is antithetical to our civilized society. If it is illegal to murder based on sex, race, or gender, would it not be equally illegal to murder a child in the womb based on these same characteristics? So this issue of non-discrimination brings us back to even what my colleague, Ms. Davis, said about eugenics. Ultimately, a nation will be judged on how they protect the most vulnerable in their society. My job here today is simple: to be a voice to the thousands of Americans that want to see the Constitution apply to the least of these in our society. When one thinks about aborting a child based on race, sex, or gender, many of us reel with disgust because we have seen the effects of such actions in countries like China and other parts of the world where they have a shortage of females that has become a national security issue. China does not even have enough females or for males to marry, so Chinese males are leaving the country, causing a labor shortage, but also causing a national identity problem. When I think about selective abortions, I can't help but be reminded about the plot about eugenics. And the black community has been one of the most hard hits for the plight of abortions in our communities. About 50 years ago, a sociologist named who was also the Secretary of Labor named Daniel Patrick Moynihan, stated that these trends in the black community began to change. The black family at that time had intact families with 78% of households having a mom and a dad. Abortion on our community was not common and was unthinkable. However, the astute eye of Moynihan saw the scrubbing of our society by God by eliminating prayer in schools in 1963 had started to take effects on the collapse of the family. Marriages began breaking down, and by 1965 we had an all-out war on poverty and began the welfare state. In the 60s, we allowed unchecked sexual freedom to get out of control, and women's rights groups like Now began influencing the NAACP to push for abortions in black communities under the guise of reducing poverty and the population. Blacks were told if we were controlled births, we would also escape poverty. Black women were seduced into this lie and are now living with the results of 16 million killed since Roe v. Wade, which took place in 1973, a mere 5 years after King's death. It's ironic that the Fifth Amendment in 1870 to the U.S. Constitution abolished discrimination based on race. A more civilized 1973 U.S. Supreme Court discriminated against the life of the unborn. In closing, I would like to invite each member to support this legislation. Think long and hard about the America we want to pass along to the next generation, a social experiment of genetic engineering at the hands of those who choose who wins and who loses in life. Come to my city. Meet some of the women who have indeed had counseling after having an abortion. I invite you. Thank you for your time.